Hey everybody, I'm so excited to be using this palette to paint this beautiful painting with acrylic inks and lots of blues and analogous colors, of course with those warm bushy foliage in the foreground. This is a reference from Santa Fe, New Mexico. I was sitting in the parking lot of a gas station after a ski trip with my kids' church youth group, and I snapped this picture. I've always liked it, and I've painted it several times. I love this, the movement of the clouds and up in the sky. I like how they look like they're going off in the distance. And of course, I love the warm bushes, the dried sages, and almost tumbleweed type plants. Of course, that's very Southwest. It married with the coolness of that blue and the coolness in the snow. Right now, I'm just using, this is a 9x12 piece of UArt, and I'm using my graphite mechanical pencil. I like to use a mechanical pencil because I don't have to worry about sharpening my pencil over and over since this paper is sanded. And I'm just sketching in the movement of those clouds right now, and I've kind of sketched in some of the, where the foliage is in the foreground. Now you'll notice that I am changing things up a little bit. One of the main things I love to do is change my references to be more pleasing compositions. And in this case, I'm going to bring some of that foliage down towards me, and I'm going to remove the footprints in the snow. I don't want those in there. And so I've also included, made some of the trees on the horizon line seem a little bit larger than they are in the reference photo. Now you've seen me use acrylic ink before. I'm using my fabric and burlap technique right here with some burnt umber and burnt sienna acrylic ink. I've put a little bit of it in a pie plate. I'm using the benefits of that burlap and fabric to help me create these, the little stalks and branches and twigs that are in this reference photo. Now, sometimes I would apply, this level, this layer of the underpainting with more of a NuPastel, like my blue NuPastel. But in this case, I want to warm things up a little bit. So I'm choosing warmer colors for my underpainting. That informs the entire, all the choices that you pull out of your palette box after your underpainting. Really, you're building on this ladder. And so since I want this painting to seem warmer, I'm going to begin with a warmer underpainting. Now you'll notice that there's lots of little threads that are sticking to the paper with this burlap. Burlap, has lots of little fibers in it. That is something I don't usually worry about because once it's dry, I can brush those fibers off. If that bothers you, then I would suggest that you use more like cotton canvas. You can use just very loose weave, any fabric. Just after it dries, you can really, brush that paper to loosen those loose fibers and knock them off the paper. I'm wanting to create kind of a hollow. So you'll, look at the reference photo and how there are areas of it that are swooping down towards, that more solid mass of grasses on that kind of in the right-hand side. I want to create kind of a little hollow. And so I've changed the reference to where it swoops down from that big large mass at the top left, and then down towards the center, and then up towards the other side. That's going to help me contain, to contain my focal point, contain the areas that I want people to look, which is going to be the shadow and, of course, the shadow and the light that we can achieve with snow. Here's another up close shot. This is a dried version, and you can see that I knocked off all those little fibers. I'm also using a sponge to just add another layer to darken some of those deep shadows in this foliage and in these tree forms. Santa Fe is full of sages and pinyon and juniper, very, tumbleweeds. So everything is pretty low to the ground. And so, I want it to look accurate to the region. I'm just tapping and touching. I'm using my backer board, the white foam core, which I really love to use because I can test the strength of my inks that I use. I'm using it to test the dilution. I'm, just softly just patting this on the acrylic ink I had already put down. Also kind of dragging it down across the paper to help me begin to form some shadow shapes. I'm going to extend the shadow shapes. Now remember, I'm using this reference as an idea. I am not copying this reference. This reference, sparks an imagination and brings out my artistic license, and I'm really honing in on the areas that I like about the reference photo. I'm almost, zooming in on the center to create more of the painting that I want, the composition that I want. And that, helps me kind of cut out the areas that aren't really, doing it for me. All of that snow in the foreground is fun, but it doesn't have a lot of detail that I want to put in right now. Okay, so along the same warm theme, I'm going to put in some warm Richardson. This is kind of a peachy coral color, and I'm going to push that in with some pipe foam just to tone the paper a little bit, so whenever I start applying my blue snow and my brighter snow, then it will have that really warm color almost as a vibration against it. I'm also putting in the same color in the sky. This is something I do a lot. If I'm going to have, if I'm going to have a painting that I want, a lot of color harmony, I want to put the same color in the sky as I put in the land. And that's going to help me to create, that color harmony, that color cohesion that we all want in our pieces. Now I'm going to add just some touches of very, very dark neutral green Terry Ludwigs to the shadows of these little scrubby sages and bushes and juniper trees. Just to have, I love a lot of contrast in my paintings, and I always like that kind of that hit of very dark. And then I like to build on top of it. I am going to push that in a little bit right here with some more pipe foam, just so those marks aren't too, I don't want them to jump out as much. This piece is going to be a lot more defined with my mark making. That's something that is so fun about snow, is you can really make those thick, juicy, chunky pastel marks that are so compelling. But these areas, I don't want everything to be that way, because if everything is important to me, then nothing is important. You have to, shine your marks in certain areas. And so I like to put down those heavy marks, and then sometimes I soften them. I'm putting in just some purples here. I want this, my shadows and my snow to be mostly analogous with that contrast of that warm browns and goldens that that the underpainting created with those peaches as well. Oh, this is my favorite part of snow. I love to start pulling in these beautiful blues of the shadows. Snow, there's just something about it that is so magical to paint. I don't think we often get to use as much blue and purple and those gorgeous tones in some of the other months, except of course in water or sky. And so it's really fun to use it on the land. Right now I am looking at the reference photo, but I'm beginning to veer off into that artistic license realm that I like to live in. A lot of times I will take the underpainting. I'll take the underpainting as my inspiration to see, what was created when I was using my fabric and my inks. Sometimes those shapes are bigger than I had planned or a different shape. And so I can't be too married to my reference photo because I have to be able to respond to my underpainting. This is so, intuitive for me. I'm just really looking at where I think the shadows would be. Remember, I'm wanting to create kind of a hollow towards the center of the piece, and how that land moves down and then maybe goes up a hill. There's also that, where I'm working right now is another piece of land that's just kind of going downwards. Now, these colors that I'm using right now are my shadow colors. I'm wanting there to be a lot of shadow. I'm making the shadows in the snow more dynamic and bigger than they are in the photo reference. I'm also using various colors here. I'm using turquoises, I'm using purples, I'm using cobalts, I'm using ultramarines next to each other. This is going to create a lot of interest in my shadow colors. Also starting to bring up some color into my sky. Really want, I want the colors to be similar. So I'm going to be using a lot of the same colors, maybe a little different value up in the sky than is down on the land. But I want the colors, I don't want a super turquoise sky and no turquoise in my land, because that wouldn't make sense. They would be competing against each other within the painting. I love to use negative painting and carving techniques, especially whenever I use my acrylic inks with the fabric, because I love all those little thready, stalks and stems that are created. And so I can use those, as part of the texture. And instead of having to work so hard to create texture with my tiny little pastels, or thick chunky pastels, I can carve in and around those shapes that I already have, which makes my job easier and helps the painting have a more loose painterly style. Starting to add some more of the lighter colors of the snow. You can see that here. These are really, these are not whites. I rarely use pure white in a painting. I'm usually using very, very light values of color, like very, very light blues. The Terry Ludwig True Lights collection is great for snow because there's so many different temperatures of white that are included in that set. If you love to paint snow, that would be a great one for you to get. I'm also adding some just tiny little flicks and, just very light touches of some hues that mirror and match the underpainting colors that I used with the inks. That just helps, the underpainting not to seem unfinished or like, I haven't put any pastel on it. Although I do really love to keep a lot of underpainting showing because I worked hard on it and I love that painterly effect that it brings to a piece. And so I don't like to cover every single bit of my underpainting. I'm also bringing in some dark shadows, or darker. I guess this isn't a really very dark value. This is a gray new pastel that I'm adding to just the underneath sides of the clouds in the sky. Also kind of experimenting with some of the creamier or whiter cloud color. These are, similar colors to what I've been using in the foreground snow, which I'm not quite finished with yet. I am creating in this piece almost a vignette effect. You'll notice, there's a lot on the edges that I haven't put any pastel on at all. I love this look, and I probably would end up cropping this piece in to be more of an 8x10. But I love not to necessarily put pastel or underpainting on the very edges because I really want people to circle in and just hone in into my focal points, which right now are the snowy effects, and also in the sky. I would consider this to be kind of a circular focal point at this point. Now, depending on your style, I am teaching you different techniques, but if you are drawn more to putting, making sure all of the paper is covered with pastel pigment, that is a personal choice. My personal choice is I love to create almost a vignette effect around my paintings. Some paintings I have a lot of more detail in, especially more of my gallery works, the works that I would submit to, exhibits, any kind of juried show. Sometimes those pieces are larger. They're not a teaching tool or a teaching painting that I'm showing specific techniques. But, I'm always drawn to trying to consistently get looser and looser. That's something that often my students will say, how do I get looser? How do I get looser? Everybody seems to want to get looser. And so this is my, way that I have almost evolved as a painter, is creating this vignette effect where I don't necessarily put anything on the edges of the piece. Whenever I go to a gallery or any kind of exhibit, a showroom, museums, I'm always drawn to paintings that are like this. And so I'm always trying to utilize that within my own work. Now, I've been painting and working on the sky. I cut in some darker, I decided I needed to darken the upper value of the sky. And then I also brought that same color down into my foreground. That is my favorite Great American Beacon color that is so wonderful for skies. I use that, in that area that I'm working on right now that I just kind of flicked with my pipe foam. I'm kind of blending and whisking some of that pastel to create that wispy cloud effect. I've also brought that, since that color hadn't been represented in my snow yet, I brought it a little bit down. I think I'm going to bring it down even more in a minute, just because I want the blues to make sense with each other. I also kind of, after I whisked in my clouds, I did make some more hard edges. I try not to have all of my cloud edges hard, especially since there's so many hard edges in my snow right now, in my underpainting and all of the little bushes and grasses. I don't want the upper areas also to be very, very hard. I like there to be a variation in softness and in edges, especially when you are wanting something to recede, which in this case would be those distant trees way off there on the horizon line, and also those clouds. I want those to be a little bit softer, pushes them way far away from us to make sure that, what we're focusing in on is this beautiful foreground. Notice the warmth of the painting versus the photo reference. This is where, under or toning the paper, I guess I would say, with that peach Richardson at the very beginning, also with the warmth of the ink. It adds a flavor, it adds a painterly flavor, if you will, to this piece. I'm, just continuing to really make some pretty juicy marks in the snow areas. Being pretty bold here. I love to just create a mark and just leave it, especially if I'm adding a little bit of air or adding a little bit of movement within my more blocky underpainting, the ink areas. That ink is, can be kind of thick. And so when you carve into it, you create all those fun little scrubby shapes. I'm continuing to add some lighter and brighter colors off in the distance. I don't want to, you can see that I'm making pretty sparing marks. I'm not, especially if you look at that distant valley, there are several colors of, light hues there. I've got a purple, I've got some almost mint green or turquoise, I've got some pinky whites and some blue whites. All of those together create just interest. It's not one solid color. As long as you have those colors represented elsewhere, you can get away with using several different colors of snow. That's what makes them so much fun. Now, as we go on this month, I am going to be teaching other ways to make snow, almost like how I taught different ways that I make autumn trees. You can create a warm base, which creates a warmer look, or you can create a cool base. And so we're going to just be experimenting and playing with different color temperatures of underpaintings, which informs the rest of your decisions. Here I'm cutting in some of that beacon color that I put up in the sky. You can see that that is the same color, and it really helps bring those two elements together to where that sky and that land really live together. Now my favorite step is to add some black tape so I can really see the piece. You'll notice that I do crop it in a little bit, and I probably would go ahead and pull this into an 8x10. But once again, I love that vignette effect. I love how chunky and marked this is with all of those different blues and violets. I hope you had fun watching, and I will see you guys soon.